All right, so today we're working on the quarter one cumulative review video. This is to get ready for your big quarter one midterm that's coming up. And so there's a lot of questions on here. Big recommendation is to go back and make sure that you use your notes. This midterm covers notes from section 1.1a, which is the notes we took on the second day of school, all the way up to 7.3, which we just did recently. And so those are the different notes that you're going to want to be using while you're working on this video. A couple other things, you'll probably want to have a calculator. Make sure that you have a ruler and a highlighter as well. So in question number 1, use the expression to answer the following questions. How many terms does the expression have? Remember that terms are grouped together by plus and minus signs. So you've got one term here, you've got a second term here, and then a third term here. So this expression has 3 terms. Coefficients are the numbers that are being multiplied by each of the variables. So in this expression, the coefficients are 3 and 5, because those are the 2 numbers that are in front of the x squared and the x. And then the constant is -7. So that's the number that's all by itself at the end that doesn't have a variable. These are in front of variables. And then this is just the number with no variable. Question number 2 wants us to combine like terms. And so we want to look for the ones that can go together. So the x's can combine with the x's, the y's can combine with the y's, and then the numbers that are all by themselves can combine with the numbers that are all by themselves. And so for this one, when I combine -2x and 8x, I get 6x. When I combine +7y with -11y, I get -4y. And then when I combine 10 plus 3, I get 13. And so that would be my simplified expression for question number 2. You want to combine all the things you can combine together, and you want to be careful for positive signs and negative signs as well. Question number 3, it says, which of the following are equivalent to the expression 8 times the quantity of 2x minus 5? And then it says select all that apply. Select all that apply is your hint that there is probably going to be more than one answer, and you want to keep your eye out for that on the test as well. So I have to show work for this one, and for this one, and for this one, and for this one, and for this one. When I do the distributive property here, I get 16x minus 40. So I multiply these two, and then I multiply those two as well, and so I'll check all of these ones. I'm going to multiply here, and then here, and then here. And I have to check all of them, not just until I find one that's the answer to the question, because it does say to select all that apply. And so when I do this one, I'll get 16x minus 40. When I do the next one, I'll get 16x minus 40 again. So this would also be an answer to the question. So far I have A and B circled. On this one, I get 4x minus 40, so that one won't be an answer to the question. And then when I do the last one, I get 16x minus 40, and so I'll circle that one as well. It's not a guarantee that you're definitely going to get more than one answer for these, but select all that apply means that you should check all of them to make sure. Question number 4, it says, what is the solution? Question number 5, it says, what is the solution? And then later on question number 6, it also says, what is the solution? So I'm going to be solving on these. On 4, I'll add the 3 to both sides. And then to finish, I'll divide both sides by 5. So for this one, I'll get x is equal to -2. On the next question, for question number 5, I have a fraction. So I'm going to start by multiplying both sides by the number that's in the bottom of the fraction. Since doing so, we'll get rid of the fraction over here on the left. So I'm going to have x is equal to -6 times +4 will give me -24. And then on this next one, on question number 6, it says, what is the solution of this equation? I'll start with the distributive property. Be careful, when you do the distributive property here, it gives you -3x, but then this is +6, not -6. Minus the 6 from both sides. And then to finish, I'll divide both sides by -3. So I'll get x equals +7 as my answer for that question. The final question on this page, Eli used the steps shown below to solve the given equation. His teacher said his solution was incorrect, so you already know that it's wrong. in which step did the first error appear? So this is what you start with. And you're looking for the first place where there is something that is typed wrong. And so for this one, when you distribute the 1/3 to the 6 and to the 12, 6 divided by 3 is 2, 12 divided by 3 is 4, and that's negative. So the mistake isn't in step 1. They minus the x from both sides. So they minus the x from here and minus the x from here. Notice how they don't show that step. You can squeeze it in really little if you want to remember what they did. So they minus the x from both sides and brought the x over here, so that's good. And then here, when they plus the 4 to both sides, that's where they make a mistake, because this is supposed to say x is equal to positive 4, not x is equal to negative 4. And so it's not step 2 where the mistake happened. It was getting from step 2 to step 3. So this number, this negative 4 that's right here, that's the first number that's written down that's incorrect. And so that's how you know that step 3 is the answer to that question, because this was the first place that the mistake happened. Question number 8 starts out with a proportion question. And so remember, to solve proportions, you're going to multiply the ones that are across from each other. And so 3x is equal to, and then you'll use your calculator to multiply those numbers out. 24 times 20 is 480. And then you'll divide both sides by 3 to finish solving. And so for this one, you'll get x is equal to 160. Question number 9 asks you to convert 120 centimeters into inches. And so remember, you're going to start by writing down the quantity that you're given. And then you're going to multiply it by a conversion factor. Conversion factors are always equal to 1. And so for this one, if 1 inch is approximately the same as 2.54 centimeters, we're trying to convert centimeters into inches. So I'm going to put centimeters on the bottom, and I'll put inches on the top. And that's because I want the unit centimeters to cross out with centimeters. When you do a conversion, you're going to do top times top. So that would be 120 times 1, which would give me 120 in the top. And then you do bottom times bottom. So the one under here times 2.54 would give me 2.54 in the bottom. And then to find the answer to this question, I would divide these numbers. So 120 on a calculator divided by 2.54. And then rounded, let's see, it doesn't tell me what to round to. So I'll just round it to 2 decimal places. So this wouldn't have an equal sign. It would actually have an approximation symbol since I'm doing rounding. It'd be approximately 47.2 inches if I converted it into inches, and if I decided to round it to just the 1 decimal place. So that would be my approximate total. What you want to remember with this question is that whatever units are here, you want them to go in the bottom of the next fraction, because you want the units to be able to cross off. And then when you divide these values, that gives you the answer to the question. The units that remain here on the top match the units on your answer. Question 10, a scale on a map is that 4 inches is the same as 30 kilometers. In our town, the hospital and police station are 105 kilometers apart. How far are they apart on the map? So if 4 inches is the same as 30 kilometers, and I'm trying to solve to figure out how many inches apart would they be on the map if they were 105 kilometers apart in real life, this isn't a conversion question up here. This is a solving proportion question. I'm going to multiply the ones that are diagonal from each other. So I'll get 30, not 3. I'll get 30x is equal to, and then I'll use my calculator to multiply those numbers out. So 4 times 105 would give me 420. And then when I solve that equation by dividing both sides by 30, I'll get x is equal to 14. And I always want to put the units on my answer. So that's going to be 14 inches for the answer for that problem. Remember, to solve this one, you cross multiply the proportion. Notice that in this previous question, you wanted the centimeters to be across from each other because you were solving to figure out and do a conversion. On this one, on question number 10, you're doing cross multiplication with solving proportions, and so that's going to be a different section for you to practice right there. So this is a different section than solving for this one was. Question 11 says the formula used to find the area of the triangle is area equals 1/2 base times height. And right now we're going to solve the expression, it's an equation, but we're going to solve for h. So if area equals 1/2 base times height, And if I'm trying to get the h all by itself, I'm going to start by multiplying both sides of this by 2. When I times both sides by 2, it makes the 2's cross out. So that's helping me get the h closer to being by itself. My problem would say 2a is equal to bh. So that's what it would turn into after I times both sides by 2. And then to finish getting the h all by itself, I would need to divide both sides by b, because then the b's would cross out. And so that would give me my answer to the question. H is equal to 2a divided by b. It's the same kind of math that you're doing when you're solving an equation. The only thing about it that's a little bit different is that when you go through and do your work for this one, you're trying to get a letter by itself. So you keep all the other letters when you're doing your division. Question number 12 wants me to graph each inequality on the given number line. So x is greater than or equal to 5 would be a closed circle on 5, and I would shade to the right. X is less than or equal to 3 would be a closed circle on 3, and then I would shade this to the left. On question, the other two, so they're not lettered or anything, but on the next two problems, this one would be an open circle at -2, and then it says less than, so I would shade to the left. And this one would be an open circle at -8, but it says greater than -8, and so I would shade to the right. So there's two things that you want to keep in mind when you're doing these problems. There's two different kinds of circles that you can draw, but sometimes they go to the right and sometimes they go to the left. The symbol here tells you what kind of circle to draw, but it also tells you which direction to shade. So x is greater than or equal to 5 is shaded into the right. X is less than or equal to 3 is shaded into the left. X is less than -2 is open into the left, and x is greater than -8 would be open into the right. Question 13 says to solve, so I'm going to treat this just like I would an equation. I'll do the distributive property on the left. So I'll multiply here and here, being careful to make sure I multiply the second part as well. 4x is less than 4, and then I'll finish by dividing both sides by 4. And so my answer for this one would be x is less than 1. Question number 14 wants you to read the directions and write an inequality that represents what's going on. Yellow Cab Taxi Company charges a flat rate of $2 plus $3 per mile. And so we want to write an equation about Monica can travel, how far Monica could travel with $26. So if it's $3 per mile plus $2 as a flat rate, she has $26 to spend, which means that she can't spend more than 26. So it's okay if her total works out to be less than or equal to $26. This is proposing a limit based on the amount of money that she has in her pocket, because with $26 in money, she can't spend more than the $26 that she has. She can spend equal to 26, she can spend less than 26, but she can't spend more than the $26 that she has to spend. Question number 15, it says solve each compound inequality. Remember, with or inequalities, you solve this one first. And then you solve this one second. Be careful on this one though. When I divide both sides over here by a -2, the direction of my inequality sign is going to flip. So I'm going to divide both sides by -2, but when I write my answer to the question, it's going to be x is less than or equal to -2, because I divided by a negative, so the greater than or equal to symbol switches to be a less than or equal to symbol. And then my answer to this question is this whole thing. So it's the whole part of the answer. Over here on letter B, this is an and inequality. And so I minus the 5 from the middle, and I minus it from the left, and I minus it from the right. And then that's my answer to the question. So if it's an and inequality, you're solving it a lot differently. If it's an and inequality, you're solving it a lot differently than if it's an or inequality, but your work still ends up being similar. Question 16 says the distance a delivery van is from the warehouse varies throughout the day, and you have a picture of a map over here. The graph shows the distance from the warehouse. What does the steepness of each segment tell you about the speed of the driver? So your answer to this question isn't just a number. It's asking you to talk about the steepness of the different segments of the graphs. So the steepness tells you how fast The driver is moving. So if it's steeper, he's moving more quickly. If it's less steep, he's slowed down. The steepness also tells you when he stops. So if at 3, 5, and 7, it's a horizontal line, and so that would be telling you when he stops. The steepness of the line can also tell you when he turns around. And so you can see that from 5 to 6, he starts heading back to the warehouse and starts driving home. And so the steepness of a graph can also tell you when the driver turns around. Question 17 is another question that asks you about that same picture. It wants you to say which segments show at times when the van was not moving. And so if you're looking to see when the van is not moving, you're looking for the horizontal parts of the graph. So that would be segment 3, segment 5, and segment 7. So 3, 5, and 7. That's the answer to the question. That's how you know that the van isn't moving. And the reason why you know the van isn't moving then is because the line is horizontal. It has 0 slope. It means that time is moving, but distance isn't, and so that means that he's stopped there. Question 18 asks you to decide between discrete and continuous. Remember, with discrete, the in-between numbers don't make sense. And then with continuous, the in-between numbers do make sense. And so these two definitions are probably the best two ways to remember discrete and continuous. If you're measuring the number of students in a class, over time it's going to change. It's not whether it changes in a straight line. It has nothing to do with that. It would be discrete because you can't have half students in a class. A dog's weight over time, the amount that a dog weighs, a dog could weigh 50 pounds, but a dog could also weigh 51 or 52 or 53, or they could weigh 51.5 pounds or 52.5 pounds. So this would be continuous over time because the in-between values do make sense when you're talking about weight. For the number of pencils in a pouch, we're going to say discrete. Even though you could break a pencil in half, you still have a pencil or you don't have a pencil. So that would only be measured in whole numbers. And then for the height of a tree over time, that one could be continuous because the tree could be 5 feet tall, but the tree could also be 5.5 feet tall. And so since the in-between values make sense, that's how you decide that it's continuous. Question number 19, which statement below correctly justifies whether the table to the right represents a function? You need to remember what the definition of function is. And so 2 of these say no, and 2 of these say yes. So that's the first job to remember which one it is. 1 goes with -5, 2 goes with 3, 3 goes with 4, 2 goes with 1 again, and then 4 goes with 2. And so the reason why the answer to this question is no is because of this. You can't have 2 go with 3 and 2 go with 1 at the same time because there's an input that's matched up with a different output or more than one output. So you know that the answer to the question has to be no, so it's either A or B. It's not because an output gets repeated, it's because an input gets repeated. No, because one input, so in this case the number 2, is paired with more than one output, in this case a 3 and a 1, and so the answer for that question would be no. Question 20, there's different drafts that you could draw, so answers to this question will vary. You definitely don't have to write this down on your paper. If something is a function, it means it passes the vertical line test, which means that if you drew something on the graph, like let's say you drew a parabola. It's not a very good parabola, but it's a parabola nevertheless. Anytime I try to draw a vertical line through here, it's only going to cross the graph one time, and so that means that I'm all set. That means that that's a function. For something to not be a function, this would be an example of not a function, and the reason is because when I draw a vertical line that goes through this place, there's a spot on the graph, I'll do it in a different color, there's a spot on the graph where it crosses the function more than one time. Now, it doesn't have to cross 3 times like this one does. It could just cross twice. We say that this one over here passes the vertical line test. And we say that this one over here, when the vertical line crosses it more than once, that means that it fails the vertical line test. So crossing in more than one spot is not a good thing when it comes to something being a function. But remember, answers to these questions will vary, so your pictures for this one do not have to look like these ones. As a matter of fact, it would probably be more helpful for you to try different problems for this one so that you can ask your teacher to get help and see if the answers you're coming up with are correct or not. All right, question 21. It says, use that relation to answer the following questions. What is the domain? What is the range? And is the relation a function? So when you make a list for your domain values, remember your domain is your x's, your range is your y's. You're going to write it in list format. And there is a rule that says that the domain usually goes from smallest to biggest, and same with the range. So when I write down the numbers for my domain, I'm going to write them down the x's, but I'm going to write them down smallest to biggest. This is an x, this is a y, this is an x, this is a y, this is an x, this is a y, this is an x, this is a y. So from smallest to biggest, my domain would be 1, 3, 5, and 6. 1, 3, 5, and 6. And then from smallest to biggest, my range would be -4, -2, and +7. Notice that even though there's 2 -2's, I only write it once. So only write repeats once. Just make a note about that so that you don't forget about that. The last part says, is the relation a function? And it wants you to explain why or why not. So 6 goes with -2, 3 goes with -4, 1 goes with -2, and 5 goes with 7. It is a function. It's okay if the range repeats itself. It's just not okay if the domain repeats itself. So you can say each input is paired with exactly one output. So there's not a number that you put in that gets paired with 2 different y's. It's okay that there's a y that gets paired up with 2 different x's, but it just can't work the other way as well. Question 22. Use a given statement to answer the following questions. The cost to enter a carnival is $12 plus $2 for each game you play, and they want to know which is the independent and which is the dependent. So independent is the one that makes the dependent change. So this is the cause and this is the effect. That's how some people remember independent and dependent. And so the thing that causes the other one to change would be the number of games you play. And then depending on the number of games you play, that would affect your cost or your total cost for attending the carnival. So this gets changed based on this. Everybody pays $12 to get in, but depending on how many games you play, that would affect how much money it costs you. Question 23 says, write an equation in function notation that represents a given scenario. So $100 plus $25 per day. It wants it in function notation. It doesn't say what letter we need to use, so you want to make a note on this that you can use any letter you want for the variable. If you let D represent the number of days that she's renting the car, the function in function notation would be f of D is equal to $25 a day plus a $100 charge, or you could write it with the 100 first and the 25D second. If you write it this way, though, just make sure the D stays with the 25 because that's the cost per day. And then just make a note here that says you can use any letter to represent days. You can use X if you want to. It won't change the meaning of the question if you use a different letter to represent the variable. But do keep in mind that both of these equations are answers to the question. You don't have to know how to write it both ways. You just want to know how to write it one way. Question 24 starts out with asking us to evaluate an expression. So this one, it says that she babysits for she charges $14 per hour when she babysits. And so if she babysits for 4 hours, how much would she earn? So if she's charging $14 per hour, her total cost could be represented by the equation y equals 4x, where x represents the number of hours that she's babysitting, and then y represents the amount that she earns. So if we define our variables that way, this equation would represent what was going on. So if she babysits for 4 hours, you do 4 times 4, or sorry, 14 and 14. You would do 14 times 4, and so you get y equals 56, which would mean she earns $56. Question 25 says to complete the table for the function. Notice that it's already in function notation. So to complete the table for this function, I'm just going to be plugging in each of these numbers for x. So negative 2 squared minus 4, negative 1 squared minus 4, 0 squared minus 4, 1 squared minus 4, and then 2 squared minus 4. And so when I simplify each of these, it will give me the numbers on the table. You just want to be careful with PEMDAS. When you square negative 2 times negative 2 turns into positive 4, and then 4 take away 4 gives you 0. Negative 1 times negative 1 gives you positive 1, and then 1 take away 4 gives you negative 3. 0 take away 4 gives you negative 4. 1 take away 4 gives you negative 3 again, and then 4 take away 4 gives you 0. 26 says to graph the following function, and so just a point about this, the slope is the number in front of your x, and the slope tells you how the line moves or where to move. The y-intercept is the number that's after, that's just a number that's all by itself, and that tells you where the graph begins, or where to begin. So on your graph, for this one, you're going to start at positive 6, so way up there at the top, and then my slope is down 4 and 1 to the right. And so for slope, if it's positive, you go up. If it's negative, you go down, but then you always go to the right. So if it's positive, you go up. If it's negative, you go down, but then once you decide up and down, then you always go to the right. And that'll help you keep the practice for slope. So I'm going to go, it's negative 4 over 1, so I'm going to go down 4, and then I go 1 to the right. And then I go down 4 and 1 to the right, and then I'll go down 4 and 1 to the right. And so that'll give me the line that I need to then connect with a ruler. If it was positive 4, it would still start at 6, but it would be going up 4 and 1 to the right. And this line has a negative slope because you can tell it's going down as you look at it from left to right. Question 27 says, find the value of f of x when x equals negative 4, and then it gives me a function. So for this one, whenever it says when x equals negative 4, it means I'm going to plug in the negative 4 over here for wherever I see an x value. So f of negative 4 is going to be equal to, I'm going to plug in a negative 4 into the equation. This doesn't mean f times negative 4. It just means that I'm plugging in of negative 4 into the problem. Half of 4 would be 2, so half of negative 4 would be negative 2. And then to finish the question, I would add those two numbers together, and so then I would get the answer to the question. So when I plug in a negative 4, I get out a positive 5. So f of negative 4 would equal positive 5, and that would be my answer for that problem. Question 28 says use the pattern to complete the table. So I need to figure out the add pattern on the bottom and then the add pattern on the top. When I look at the top, it looks like it's just missing regular numbers. So that's a 1, that's a 3, that's a 4. So this would have to be 2, and this would have to be 5. So my pattern on the top is that I'm adding 1 each time. Plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1, plus 1. And now I need to go down to the bottom and figure out what my add pattern is on the bottom. To get from 9 to 13, I added 4. To get from 21 to 25, I add 4. And so then to figure out these other numbers, I'll also have to add 4, add 4, add 4. So 13 plus 4 would give me 17. 17 plus 4 would give me 21. 21 plus 4 gave me 25. And then 25 plus 4 would give me 29. And so those numbers would work for all of them. So you want to look at the add pattern, or look for look for the adding pattern for x and y. So you want to look for both of them. Question number 29 says, use the table to answer each question. A says, what is the domain? And B says, what is the range? And so remember, your domain is your x's, your range is your y's. And so when you list off your domain and your range, there's a couple different ways that you can write them down. I'll write them under here. We're going to write these in a list format. So my domain for this one would be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. If there were any repeats, I would only list it once. And then my range for this one is going to be 13, 15, 17, 19, 21, and 23. And again, if there were any repeats, I would only list it once. So question 29 was just asking if you knew the difference between the words domain and range as vocabulary items. Question 30 says to find the fourth term in the sequence defined by this rule. And so to figure out what the fourth one is, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to plug in the number 4 into the function. So to find the fourth one, I'll plug in the number 4. Notice how I'm careful. All I took out was the x, and I put in the 4 in its place. When I square this 4, I'm only squaring the 4. I'm not squaring the negative. So it's going to stay negative 16. Positive 4 times positive 4 gives me positive 16, but then the negative that was on the outside keeps it as negative 16. And then to find the answer to this question, I just need to add together negative 16 and positive 9. And so when I add those two numbers together for this problem, I get negative 7. So f of 4 would be equal to negative 7. And so negative 7 would be the fourth number in the list. Question 31 says, how do you know if an equation is linear? And it wants you to list two conditions. So if an equation is linear, x and y are raised to an exponent of 1. So there's no x squared or y squared, or in fact any other variables that would have squareds on it. And then the other way that you could is you can write it in standard form. And so remember, standard form says ax plus by equals c, where a and b both aren't equal to 0 at the same time. So an example of a linear equation, you can give it in a couple of different ways. You could write this in standard form. You could write it in slope-intercept form. So do keep in mind that your answers to this question will vary. And so for this question, you just want to write one down and then double check with your teacher to make sure that the equation that you write down is correct. To know that an equation's in standard form, there's a couple different things that you have to think about. X and y have to be on the same side. And they're both usually on the left. And x is usually first. The second thing that needs to be true is that there's no fractions or decimals. And then the last thing that needs to be true is that the x term cannot be negative. So if that number out in front of the x is negative, then it's not going to be in standard form. B says to give an example of an equation that is in standard form, and then C says to give an equation of an example that is not an example of an equation that's not in standard form. And so for these, your answers will vary. So again, you should write down two equations, one where it is in standard form and one where it isn't in standard form, and then check them with your teacher to make sure that the equations that you came up with are correct. Question number 33 gives you a picture of a graph, and it asks you to find and interpret the x and y intercepts. So when you find them, you're going to list what they are. And then when you interpret them, you're going to write some words that describe what they mean. So the y-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the y-axis. So my y-intercept is 0, 10, and that represents that Chris starts with $10. The x-intercept is the point where the graph crosses the x-axis, and so that's the point 7, 0, and so that represents that Chris will run out of money after or in 7 days. And so I'm using the axes and what they represent to help me understand the question. 34 and 35, your answers to these questions are going to vary. So you want to try these and then check with your teacher to see if you got them right. So answers will vary is just a way of saying that you're going to get different answers for these problems. This one wants you to draw a line with an x-intercept of 5 and then write the equation for the line you created. So it's going to have to go through this point, but it's also going to have to contain a line somewhere else. Question 35 says to draw a graph with a slope of 0 and then write the equation for the line you created. So 0 slopes go this way. Your answer for both of these questions are both going to say y equals to start. But depending on the lines that you draw for each of them, they'll finish being in different places. So again, try those two and then have your teacher check your answers to make sure that they're right. Question 36 wants you to use the graph over here. So it says use the graph at the right to answer the following questions. Part 1 is find the slope. So when you're finding the slope, you want to go through and pick off points that are exactly on the line. So you're looking for points that make the graph where it goes through exactly through a crisscross. So to get from here to here, I go down 2 and 1 to the right, down 2 and 1 to the right, down 2 and 1 to the right. So my slope is going to be -2. The y-intercept of the graph is this point up here, and so the y-intercept is the point that I'm circling here. So that's up at, my b would be +3. And so then part C says, what is the equation of the line? And so these are the only two things that I need to write the equation of the line. The equation for this line is going to be y equals, my slope goes in front of the x, and then the y-intercept goes all by itself. And so that would be the equation of the line given in that particular graph. Remember, to find the equation of a line, all you need to know is the slope, and you need to know the y-intercept. Question 37 it's a BMXY chart, but it has the extra step first. So remember, this is your x1, this is your y1, that's your x2, and that's your y2. And so I can't start by using a BMXY chart because I need to start by figuring out what my slope is. They haven't told me what the slope is yet on this question. So I'll do y2. You know what, I should write the slope formula out first. So I'll do y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. And now I'm going to go through and I'm going to plug my numbers in. So 3 take away -7 on the top, and then 6 take away 1 on the bottom. Minus minus will turn into a plus, so that's going to give me 10 divided by 5, which will give me 2. So the slope of the line that goes through these 2 points is the number 2. Remember, when you do the next step on your problem, it's up to you to decide how you want to do it. We'll do a BMXY chart. This is just a way of organizing your letters in case your teacher didn't teach it to you this way. So B is the thing you're still trying to figure out, BMXY. So M is the slope of the line. So for this one, you got that the slope was 2. And then for the X and the Y, it doesn't matter which numbers you pick. Some people pick this one, some people pick this one. No matter which problem which point you pick, you'll get the right answer to the question. So when you're plugging those into your table, it's up to you to decide. Sometimes people will pick the one without the negatives because they think it'll be easier. And so for this problem, I'll use this point. So my X is 6 and my Y is 3. And then I'm going to plug that into y equals mx plus b to go through and solve to figure out what my b is. So the y goes in for the y, m for m, x for x, and then the b stays b. 6 times 2 is 12. And then when I minus the 12 from both sides, 3 take away 12 gives me that my b is -9, but that's not the answer to the question. They wanted us to find the equation of the line in slope-intercept form. And so that the equation of the line in slope-intercept form, you have to write down the whole equation. So it's going to be y equals 2x minus 9. I solved to figure out that my slope was 2, and then I solved to figure out that my y-intercept was 9, and so that's where I get the second number for that question right there. Question number 38 has no work because you can see your y-intercept is right here, and then you can also count your slope. So to get from here to here, I go up 2, and then I go 3 to the right. So the equation for this line would be y equals 2/3 x minus 2. My slope was up 2 and 3 to the right. And then the graph started or began down here at this point, -2. So that's how I found that part. Question number 39 has a couple steps to it that you have to take. So first of all, it tells you the slope. It tells you a point that's on the line. So you don't need to start with the slope formula, but in order to write this as an equation, you do need to figure out the y-intercept because you don't know what your b is, so that's what you're solving for. My slope is 2/3, my x is 9, and my y is 8. And so then the next thing that I need to do is I need to solve for b, so I'll plug them into the formula y equals mx plus b. So the 8 goes in for the y, the 2/3 goes in for the m, the 9 goes in for the x, and then the b stays b. 2/3 times 9, there's a couple different ways you can do it. You can do 9 divided by 3 is 3, and then 3 times 2 is 6. Or you can do 9 times 2 is 18, and then 18 divided by 3 is 6. But either way you do it, you get 6 as your answer. And then to finish solving for b, I would minus the 6 from both sides. So I'm going to get that my b is 2. Remember, that's not my answer to the question. Notice that the directions to this question wanted me to write the answer in standard form. And so when I write the answer in standard form, let's see, y equals mx plus b, and then I'm going to write it in standard form. So when I write it in y equals mx plus b form, I already figured out that my m was 2/3, or they told me that, and then I figured out that my y-intercept was +2. So if I was writing it in slope-intercept form, I would write it just like this, but they want it written in standard form, so now I have to do all the stuff to fix it to put it into standard form. The first thing I'm going to do is multiply all of them through by a 3. So 3y is equal to, those cross out, 2x plus 6. And then I have to move the 2x over to the other side. So that's going to turn it into -2x plus 3y is equal to +6 because the 2x switch sides. And then remember, this is almost finished, but there's one more rule for standard form. It says that I'm not allowed to have a negative leading coefficient. So I'll have to go through and divide all of these by -1. My final answer to the question, written in standard form, is going to be 2x minus 3y is equal to -6. And I know that this is correctly in standard form because there's no fractions and no decimals. The x and the y are together over on the left-hand side. The x is first, and the number in front of the x is a positive number. Question 40 wants me to practice just writing the equation in standard form. And so there's a couple things on this one that I'm going to need to fix. First of all, I'm not allowed to have a fraction. So I'll go through and times everything by 2 because that'll cross out that part on the fraction right there. So that's going to turn this into 2y is equal to -10x plus 1. And then the only other thing that I have left to fix to get this into standard form is I would just have to add the 10x to both sides to move it over to the left. So 10x plus 2y is equal to +1 would be the answer for this question written in standard form. Question number 41 gives you two functions, and so it asks you to figure out the transformations on the graph of the parent function that result in the graph of the new function. So for this question here, there's two things that are happening. The first one's the +3, and so the +3 is going to move g of x up 3 units. So up 3 units from the regular graph. And then the other thing that happens that changes is that number 2 that's out front. And so the 2 is going to change two things. It's going to rotate the graph, but it's also going to make the graph be 2 times steeper. So it's going to be getting larger at a rate 2 times steeper than the other graph would be. And so those two things will both change on the graph. When you're wording these questions, there's different ways that you can word that to have the answer mean the same thing. So that's one way that you could write it. You also want to make sure you put a note on this one that says that it's also rotated around the point 0,3, and it's 2 times steeper than the original graph was. So include both of those on your answer. Question 42, a school sells chips for $5 a bag and water for $2 each at the football game. It says the school needs to sell $46 worth of snacks by the end of the game. Write a linear equation that describes the problem. So you could use x and y for this problem if you wanted to. You could use C for chips and you could use W for water. No matter what you do, just define your variables. So if you let x equal chips, and if you let W or Y equal water, if they're trying to sell $46 worth of stuff $5 for each bag of chips plus $2 for each water sold would need to equal $46 in order for them to reach their sales goal. So you're taking the math that's happening in words and you're translating it into math to give an equation that represents what's going on in the problem. Pam wants to hire a dog walker for her 2 dogs for this weekend. She has 2 choices. So dog walker A charges $16 per dog and $8 per hour. So 8x would represent the $8 per hour. 32 would represent the cost because there's 2 dogs that she's walking. Dog walker B charges $18 per dog and $6 per hour. And so again, 6x is the $6 per hour, and then 36 is because there's 2 dogs that it says in the problem that are being walked. And the question says, when will the 2 dog walkers charge the same amount of money? So you could solve this by making a table if you wanted to, but a faster way would be to take the 2 expressions and set them equal to each other, and then you can solve for x. So 2x plus 32 is equal to 36. And when you minus the 32 from both sides, you're going to get 2x equals 4. And then you would divide both sides by 2, so you would get x equals 2. So they would charge the same amount at 2 hours. A table would also let you figure out the same information, so this is just an alternative to drawing a table, setting the 2 equations equal to each other. Question number 44, it says write the linear inequality that's represented by the graph, and so the graph that's given to you is over here. So there's a couple different things you want to keep in mind. This graph is going up, so you know that the boundary line is going to have a positive slope. You know that the line is solid. And then from looking at the graph, if this was a tree in the forest and if it fell down, it would fall this way. And so you know that this line is shaded down from the line. And so those 3 pieces of information should help you figure out how to write the inequality for the graph. So the y-intercept is at -6, and then it goes up 3 and over 1, up 3 and over 1. So that lets you figure out the slope of the line. So you know it's going to be y is something than 3x minus 6. And so the last part left to determine is the direction of the inequality symbol and then which type of inequality symbol goes in here. So if it's a solid line, you know it's going to have the or equal to part underneath. And then if it's shaded down from the line, you know it's going to be less than or equal to instead of, oh, I did that backwards. You know it's going to be less than or equal to, not greater than or equal to. So this would give you the inequality that would represent everything that was going on in that problem. And then last but not least, question 45. The price for admission to a water park is $24 for each adult ticket. So we'll let, oh, they already defined their variables. So let x equal the number of adult tickets and let y equal the number of child tickets. So it's $24 per adult and $18 per child. And they want to sell at least that much money, so be careful for the words at least. So if x is the number of adult tickets, 24x plus, and then y is the number of child tickets that they sell. And if they want it to be at least 12,500, they want it to be greater than or equal to 12,500. Notice that the directions to this question only say that you have to write the linear inequality, which means that you do not have to solve the linear inequality. So that would be the answer for that question there.